Okay, hello everybody. So take the vest off here. All right. Well, welcome. Looks like I think there's 18 people watching, which is weird because my YouTube studio doesn't show any. So I wasn't sure if anyone was here, but that's okay. Oh, there it is. I see. There, it took a second for it to catch up. Okay. All right. So today, yeah, I just figured it would make more sense for us to do the lecture like this, right? To actually do it online rather than forcing everybody to come to campus. I figure it's super freezing cold outside, and I was 2 minutes from campus earlier in the day, but I was just like, let's let people stay home. Okay, or wherever you are. So today, all right, a couple of things, right? So obviously, I don't know if I've used this in the class before because I'm forgetting I have 5 classes and it's messing with my head a little bit. If you want to put in some questions and comments, we can do so using Slido. See if I can actually make it go forward. Okay, there we go. Whoops, that did something totally different. Okay. If I could just get someone to confirm for me that you can hear me okay. It looks like my audio is working and everything is fine. I just want to make sure that you can actually hear me. So you can either throw that in Slido or just type it in the YouTube chat if you could, just to make sure I'm not talking into the void. Reg, perfect. Thank you. Awesome. Much appreciated. Okay, so today, sort of my plan is to keep going on. Sorry, my brain just not working today. Is to keep going on talking about survey design, and if we get into it, to start with probability sampling. So the way it's kind of looking to me at the moment is probably like next. So this Wednesday we'll have class, and anticipate as the temperature comes up a little bit, we'll be able to move it in person, and everything there is going to be fine. I think. Let me check the temperature. Yeah, Wednesday, 21 degrees, minus 21. That's nothing to sneeze at, but it's not so cold. So we should be back. And then I think we'll have enough material on the quant side, basically easily to get us to reading week, right? Keep losing my mouse here. To reading week, because I wanted to check something. There it is. Okay. Yeah, so I think we'll be able to get easily to reading week. I'll just use my phone. To reading week, after which point, essentially, we take a break for a week and we come back to the exam on, like, the first midterm on the Monday. So we'll cover the material up to the end of probability sampling, and then basically that's what we have. So if we get through that, between today, Wednesday, and next Monday, we'll probably have a sort of gap Wednesday where we can do some drop-in. If you want some help on your lab assignment, you can drop in on the Wednesday. But other than that, we won't actually put new material out on Wednesday of next week. And that's sort of how it's looking now. Okay, so let's keep going. Oops, I have to be in the right. Sorry, I have 3 monitors going on at the moment, so it makes it a little chaotic. Okay, so I'm going to make myself a little smaller here, or maybe make myself disappear altogether. Let's make me a little smaller. Just disappear up into the top corner. Rarely have text up there. Okay, so we were talking about survey design last time. Right, so we have our kind of survey design. We went through a whole bunch of, kind of do's and don'ts when it comes to survey design. when it comes to how we build survey questions, what that looks like. We critiqued some bad survey questions that I had written, or taken from like past student assignments. So we looked through kind of some problems. So I'm going to suggest a couple of other things that we can do in terms of designing questions, and we're going to talk a little bit more about surveys in general and some other choices, and we'll kind of go from there. Okay, so one of our other kinds of questions, right, is the vignette question. So vignette questions basically are questions where you would essentially write your respondents a little story, right? You ask them how they would respond in a particular circumstance. So, I guess I use vignette questions in multiple choice exams relatively frequently, right? Where you tell a little story and then you ask, Jane is a Marxist. What does she think about this issue? Those are vignette style on a multiple choice test. Vignette questions, when it comes to surveys, are quite similar, but essentially you'd be putting someone in sort of a scenario, right? Like your neighbor is being noisy on a Saturday night, and despite your best efforts, your neighbor refuses to end their party or quiet down, and it's 3 a.m, right? Which of the following do you think are appropriate, right? Or, you're the Prime Minister of Canada, and Donald Trump has just essentially started a trade war with your country. Which of the following would be, something you would consider doing? So, there's all sorts of reasons for vignette questions, but a big one here is that basically, you're wanting to anchor things in a real-world scenario. So you're wanting to make things a little bit more real for people, to take things out of the realm of the abstract. Abstract questions can be really good, obviously, for judging lots of things. There are, however, certain limits to these really, really abstract questions, right? And sometimes people just won't know how to answer them. So the vignette, can be really useful, in kind of anchoring things down. And again, one of the places you see this, and hopefully none of you end up here, but, sometimes it happens, is in marketing, right? Marketing uses a lot of vignette questions. Like, hey, you're in the grocery store and you're presented with these 2 brand options. Which brand would you choose and why, right? That's sort of vignette question. And again, meant to anchor people in a sort of real world situation, or you might tell people something about the brands. Like this one is made in Canada, that one's made in the USA, the third one is made in Mexico, the first one contains soy, the second, use it a lot in marketing to kind of get a sense of how people might answer something. Now, it helps create distance between the question and the respondent, right? So suddenly you're taking them out of their own life and you're sort of putting them in a story and asking them to consider, based on their principles and values, how they would react to particular things. So hopefully it's more candid. The weakness, right? Sometimes people might act differently, or people might say they would act this way in a particular circumstance, but when they actually go to the grocery store, right, instead of buying, I don't know, like, PC Cola, because it's made in Canada and we're in a trade war with America. This lecture is going to age like milk, I think. Right? They actually just buy Coca-Cola because Coca-Cola is objectively better than PC Cola, or whatever it happens to be. Right? So, you can put people in a circumstance where, they're going to give you that same thing, a sort of social desirability bias, not really how they feel, but they're going to answer based on what they think you want as, as the interviewer, or, based on emotions that don't reflect their real world behavior. Okay. So these are, however, often useful. And like I said, marketing likes this because, they can be used to judge like what values are most important to you or something like that in a way that's less direct than saying, hey, what values are important to you? So I would say marketing, I can see the usefulness here. In social research, you can definitely use them. But again, I don't know that they're the most. They're useful, but they definitely require a lot of skill to write a good vignette question that's going to get you the answer you want. Okay, I am, however, going to propose one other kind of question. It's not really a vignette question in a sense, and it's not something that's commonly used, but it's something that I've definitely heard of, and it definitely has a very particular purpose that I'm going to tell you about. And it's related to this principle here, right? This idea of creating distance between the respondent and their answer. I'm going to change colors here just to emphasize that we're in different territory. Okay, actually, let's clear the garbage. Okay, this one. So, one of the things, and this particular insight comes out of the 2016 U.S. election, and I think it's really interesting in the following sense. So, why is it useful to create a distance between the question and the respondent? Well, usually, one of the things that we're always battling as social researchers is social desirability bias, right? Social desirability bias is a genuine problem in social research, because sometimes people will tell you what they think you want to hear, right? Or they're going to mischaracterize their own beliefs based on something else. So, one of the ways to get around social desirability bias is to create a distance between the question and the respondent. Essentially, so that it's not about them. So, if you recall, now, I don't know, I can never tell. With, you all getting younger and me staying the same age all the time. No, me getting older, actually. I just get older. You all stay the same age, right? You're between 18 and 23. I am just getting older and older. So I remember things from, before you were paying attention a lot of times. Right, so this is like 9 years ago. Where were you 9 years ago? Some of you were in elementary school. So, nevertheless, right, 2016, right, in the U.S., you had Trump versus Clinton. The original, Clinton. Hillary Rodham Clinton. The kind of original Trump cage match, right? All of the polls were showing Clinton massively ahead of Trump, right? Save for like two. So Clinton was way ahead of Trump in all of the polling, right? The New York Times aggregator and 538.com were giving Clinton like a 95% chance of winning based on the polling. And what happened on election night? Obviously, Trump was victorious. Yay, I guess. So why? And what does this have to do with creating distance between the question and the respondent? The only polls that got it right, that saw the sort of Trump wave and identified, what you might call the shy Trump voters, were pollsters that basically understood that voting for Trump, and even saying in polls that you were going to vote for Trump, sort of was associated with negative things, right? That basically, people didn't want to admit that they would vote for Trump. So what they asked was what was called the neighbor question. I'll write it like an American, right? Because we're using American spelling, because we're talking about the U.S. If we were in Canada, we would be neighbors, but we're neighbors. Okay, so what is the neighbor question? Again, it's basically a way of getting over here, right? Creating a sort of distance between the person taking your poll or responding to your questions and the question itself. So what they asked was, they obviously asked questions like, hey, who are you going to vote for? And people said Clinton. And then they asked a question like, well, who do you think your neighbors are voting for? And in those kind of 3 red states that Trump won in order to, essentially squeak out the narrowest of narrow electoral college victories in the U.S., a large percentage of people said, well, they were voting for Clinton. They believed their neighbors were voting for Trump. Now, what the pollsters who used this kind of neighbor question said was that, when they were asking about the neighbor, they actually weren't asking about the neighbor. They were asking about themselves, like they were asking about the respondent. But they had realized that there was a sort of, shy Trump effect. That people were going to vote for Trump, but they didn't actually want to admit that they were going to vote for Trump. Right, because there's all sorts of negatives associated with it, and when you're doing push phone polling, right, people didn't want to check that Trump box. So they asked the neighbor question. Well, okay, you're voting for Clinton. Who do you think your neighbor is voting for? And a lot of their neighbors were voting for Trump. But what they were actually telling you is that they and their neighbors were all voting for Trump, right? Especially in these working class neighborhoods. So by distancing it from them, they were actually able to get a much better sense that Trump was going to squeak out a victory, right? And so the pollsters that used this kind of neighbor question were much more successful. Now, this is only really useful in certain circumstances, right? So by 2020, we can basically discount the shy Trump voter, right? Because by 2020, in the U.S., people weren't shy anymore. They'd sort of like, Trump is all culture war and all that. But people had become kind of comfortable with Donald Trump for whatever reason. And so, the neighbor question wasn't as effective. So it really only worked by 2024, I'm just like, what year did we just finish? The polling was much more accurate because, people who were going to vote for Trump were like, yeah, make America great again. I probably shouldn't do voices, it's bad. They're not all hillbillies. Make America great again, right? They were happy to, I was like, this looks like a junior high girl's notebook, and Trump is the boy she really wants to date. Right, there's sparkles and maybe like a heart around it, I don't know. I feel gross now. I'm going to erase that. By 2024, right, it was far less pertinent, far less relevant, just because, that shy Trump thing wasn't really an issue anymore, right? It was, people were comfortable with MAGA and Donald Trump and saying who they voted for. So the polls were much more accurate, right? And, with a few glaring errors, we had a pretty good sense who was going to win that election prior to it. Okay, it's the purple and the sparkles that makes it look like Donald Trump, or like a junior high girl's love letter to Donald Trump. All right, I'm going to erase that because I just can't take it. All right. Okay, so all that to say, right? And that's a really long, complicated way of just kind of summing up. Getting to past social desirability bias is a challenge. So vignette questions can be really useful to that. And something like if you suspect social desirability bias, you can easily sort of pivot and use another type of question that distances an individual from the question, right? So it's no longer about them, but it's about people that they think are like them, right? This is your shy Trump kind of question. So that can be really useful. And honestly, when I say it's only a couple of people who were able to kind of predict that 2016 Trump win, 100% seriously, they'll admit that it was that neighbor question that enabled that at the end of the day. Okay, so, oops, sorry. As I said, I have too many screens going, so now I'm going to move myself over here so I have room to write. Okay, so rules for designing, your survey, and you're going to do this. So, in mini lab number 3, I know you just did mini lab number 2, so I don't want to stress you out or anything. But on mini lab number 3, one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do is essentially sort of run a pilot study. Now, this can be very formal or very informal. Um, it could be a few people. Like, I remember when I was doing one survey, my parents fit the demographic I was looking for. So just like, and my sister and a few of my friends. So like, just to kind of, just to kind of test the questions, just to make sure they were clear, right? That non-experts would understand what they meant and all of this stuff. I basically had them run the survey for me, right? So I threw them into a SurveyMonkey portal with, the questions built in, just so they could do it, and I could just kind of judge whether the tool was working as anticipated. Okay, so, the other thing, especially once you get into software, what's called logic, and, routing, are going to be some of your best friends and worst enemies. And basically, that's because when you use a piece of software like a SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics or any other kind of online survey software or digitized survey software, there's what's called a flow, right? So, and because there's no human being there, if the logic of how your thing progresses breaks, you got some trouble. Okay, my legs are getting tired, so I'm just gonna swap my desk to sitting position here. So bear with me, so I can sit down. Okay. Yes, I have a fancy standing desk. I'll lower myself with it. You're coming with me. Okay. So running a pilot study. So sometimes people will do this for a bunch of different reasons. Sometimes it'll be, you want to test your instrument. Sometimes you want to do a small-scale quantitative study. You want to use a small-scale quant study to inform something like a qual study, right? You want to do interviews, but you don't know what to ask, so you do a small pilot study to kind of get it. But mostly, right, the big one, I think, maybe I'll use a highlighter. It's fun. You want to test whether instruments or the entire item operates as a whole. And things like logic can be really tricky, right? So, if it's like, so your first question is, blah, blah, blah. And if they answer A, they go on to, they skipped over to question 7. But if they answer B, they go to question 2. Right? And then on until they get to 7, right? This is called logic. And it is genuinely kind of challenging at times to program these things correctly. So you definitely want to use pilot studies to get any logic problems out, right? Like, you can run them yourself and you can double check, but it really helps to have people just run through it and tell you where it breaks. So that is really useful. Even if people are role playing and pretending, it's still useful. Okay. With open questions. Right, so you remember open questions, right? This is a box typically where people are going to write whatever they want, or a question on a phone survey, or an in-person survey where people are just allowed to talk. So you can use these open questions, right? Especially if you don't know a lot, right? If you're not super well grounded in, say, the topic, and you're trying to kind of get a sense of the lay of the land, you can use it as a way, a small quant study with, say, we're doing kind of qualitative research, mini interview almost, just to get a sense of, like, is there anything in the things that people write that you can then, kind of take and turn into, your statements with your A, B, C, D, E kind of answers, right? So you're turning open questions, taking the themes, analyzing them, taking the themes out, and turning them into closed questions, right? Usually, right, you're doing a small scale thing in terms of that pilot study to then use a bigger tool later. Okay. Provide interviewers with experience administering the instrument. So I've seen this go a couple of ways, right? A pilot study is one. Training with role playing is another. And, I just thought of another one. You can call it, this is probably not the right term, but I'll use it anyway, co-pilot method, right? Where they're sitting with an experienced person using the tool while they do it. Okay, So this is a very specific scenario, right? This would typically be where you're doing, either in person, which are rare. We don't do many of them anymore, although the study going on at the Center for Criminological Research at U of A is doing these in person at first anyway, and then phone, right, where you're actually speaking to people. So some experience kind of using the tool, right? Using the instrument, using the survey, and seeing how it flows, getting a sense of it, so you're not just plopping someone down in front of someone and be like, okay, now follow the questionnaire and see how that goes. Okay. I have to say, I'm using my Surface pencil today rather than the one that came with my Dell. And I must say that at the end of the day, the fact that I can just use the back of it as an eraser like I would on a pencil is really handy for clearing off small sections. Okay. Let's see if there's any questions so far. Oh, is the neighbor question a type? Okay, this is a good question. So the neighbor question is not, I would say, really a vignette question. More, and let's go back. It shares this quality with vignette questions, right? So it isn't what I would call a vignette question, because you're not really telling a story, right, or presenting one or more scenarios, which is what a vignette does. It's like, Joe has 3 cats, or, you're at the grocery store, or you're in the voting booth, or a canvasser for Donald Trump comes to your house, what do you do? But it does this, so it doesn't do that, right? Because it's not like telling you a story about your neighbors, but it is, I think critically, so yeah, different than the vignette. Critically, it is creating distance, right? Because suddenly, I'm not asking about you anymore. I'm asking about, someone else. And asking about someone else is important in the sense that it allows you to be a little bit more honest. Because suddenly you're not saying, let's just say even something stupid, like you're doing a phone survey and they're asking you, are you going to vote for the first woman president or Mango Hitler? I kid, right? I don't really think Donald Trump is Mango Hitler. That's what my daughter calls him. I think it's funny. First woman president or Mango Hitler. And you don't really want to say, because I don't know, maybe your wife is there, right? Or your mom. Or, your weird uncle, or actually completely normal uncle that isn't voting for Trump and has very strong opinions about it. So you say, well, I'm voting for first woman president, and then they're like, well, now who do you think your neighbors are going to vote for? Right? And because you're asking about someone else, it's like, oh man, like my neighbors, like you should see the Trump signs. Everybody's voting for Mango Hitler. So that's the benefit, right? Is it creates a distance, right? You're not talking about yourself, so you don't have to worry as much about social desirability bias because you're talking about your neighbors, right? You're talking about someone else. Okay. I've doodled this slide enough, so I'm just going to go forward just again. Okay, yes. Is there a specific name? It's called the neighbor question, right? So it is called the neighbor question. I can't remember which pollster used it off the top of my head. I should have looked it up before class. But yeah, it's called the neighbor question, right? So, and again, we'll spell neighbor in the American way. It's called a neighbor question. Again, it's not a vignette question. It's just a question with that similar defamiliarizing character. Okay. I know, I'm just paging through now, creating a big mess. Poo poo, poo poo. There we go. Okay. Erase what's over here. Okay, other things, right, why would you use a pilot study? Maybe you've created a question, where you think, let's say you've got your statement, I don't know, something silly. I like shrimp. And then you've got your, strongly agree, agree, neither, disagree, and strongly disagree. Right? I like shrimp is a stupid question. So, I don't have to make another Donald Trump question here. The way it's going, we're all going to become American, not by our own will, and then I'm going to get thrown in Mango Hitler jail. Okay, so I like shrimp, and let's just say, for whatever reason, almost everybody disagrees, right? You got like a 99% disagree rate. I know. Who doesn't like shrimp? But let's say for whatever reason, you're not getting a lot of variability, right? So, you would probably want to scrap this question, right? Or rework it in some way so you're getting a lot more variability in the answers given. Because what you've probably got is just a bad question, or it's hitting a demographic funny. I don't know, maybe I can't think of a reason why people wouldn't like shrimp. But use your imagination and think maybe there's a reason for general shrimp hatred in Edmonton, right? Whatever it happens to be. So, there might not be a lot of variability in the answer, so it's not going to tell you very much. So you maybe want to reword that question or kind of rework it. Obviously, right, you can identify questions that are embarrassing or uninteresting, right? Some people might be like, doing your pilot survey, and especially, if you have friends or colleagues doing it, they'd be like, why are you asking this question? I don't think I've ever hit on an embarrassing question, to be honest. I do think I've written some uninteresting ones. So, it can help you identify those embarrassing or uninteresting questions. Maybe the way you phrase something is just embarrassing, and it's going to, I don't know, maybe cause people to rage quit your survey. Who knows? If there's a question that's hard to understand, that was pretty easy to understand, right? People are going to flag it maybe as a difficult to understand question, or you're going to see that people are answering in ways that don't make sense based on the question. Maybe your question is poorly written. Maybe you're using jargon, right? Or specialist language, which is jargon. So, you might want to cut that out. Oh, such a nice pen. Okay. Can be used to determine the adequacy of instructions, right? If your questions have instructions in them, you can test whether that works, whether people can answer the questions. And whether the instrument has a satisfactory flow. So there you could be talking about logic and routing, but also just like the progression of the tool, right? Is it keeping people engaged, or is it dragging? And here, again, I'm going to cite marketing as one of the people who definitely need to think about flow. Marketing is one of those things, and again, I don't wish any of you a future in marketing, but certainly marketing is a whole pile of social science data, and the same tool sets that you're learning now are used by marketers every day. So, one of the things I find with marketing surveys, and again, as we get into, designing your own surveys, go to LegerWeb. Go to Abacus. Don't go to ECOS. Those guys are garbage. Their methodology's all screwed up. So don't sign up with ECOS. But go to LegerWeb and go to Abacus, or maybe Angus Reid. Right? They've all got platforms you can sign up for just to see how some of this is done. And there's a lot of marketing stuff on there. I know this because I don't do them as much anymore, but I used to do a ton of these. And one of the things I generally found with marketing was flow, right? Oh my gosh. You would get stuck in what seemed like, and here I'll erase so I can illustrate, because I know you all love my doodles. You'd have your form, and it was like, your opinion on a brand, brand opinion. And then it would just be like, Nike, Adidas, and like a bunch of brands. And it's like, you'd have, your positive, or a very positive opinion, positive, neutral, negative, very negative, right? And it would just be for each of these, right? You'd have to go through and you'd have to pick your answer for each of these. And then, it's like, okay, finally, I got done with that page, and it's time to go on to the next one. I did this part of the marketing survey, and now they're going to ask me for something else, right? And then it was like, okay, well, good, you did the shoe brands. Well, now we're going to do cars. We got our 4, And it was, to judge a bunch of brand awareness and stuff like this, right? So you're Ford and Toyota and whatever, right? And on and on. And the flow of these surveys was undoable, right? Because at a certain point, you do 3-4 pages of this, and you're just like, I don't even know what I'm looking for anymore. I don't even know what I'm doing anymore. I wish I'd never been born. Why did I ever click on this survey to do? They only offered me 1,000 points, and it takes 15,000 to get a $10 Visa gift card, and I just want to hurt myself. So I'm maybe paraphrasing a little, but there are times, and you just rage quit. You do want to make sure that things flow and that your survey participants aren't getting bored, right? That that there's some kind of variation in the kind of question types you're asking, that you're not asking all the same things. Maybe you want to split this up, and here's like, okay, I did the car ones, and now I'm going to show you a picture of a Ford ad, Ford, a Mustang, muscle cars, trucks, and then get your opinion on these images, right? Or the worst one for me was always with some of these marketing surveys was they would show you ads for whatever, like TD Bank or something, and they're like, how would you rate your awareness of this marketing campaign? And I was always like 0, because I do everything in my power to avoid ads. Like, I pay for YouTube Premium. I, have ad blockers on everything. I really just don't want to see. I even bought for $3 so you could watch Amazon Prime without ads. I never watch Amazon Prime ever. But I just didn't want to be bothered with ads, right? I have Spotify Premium, all that stuff. So my answer was always like 0, no, don't know anything, never seen it, don't care, don't have cable, don't want it. Oops, sorry. So that made for a very boring survey for me. You want to make sure that your surveys are going to keep your audience engaged, because what is going to happen if you don't is they're going to quit. And then that data, and it's not easy, increasingly attracting survey participants is not easy, right? It's getting harder. And so if you have someone who has agreed to do your marketing survey or whatever, you really do not want them to hit that quit button, right? To go to the top of their browser and they get the box and the X and the dash or whatever. You really don't want them to click on that old X, because then you've lost them, and all of that effort that it took you to get them 3/4 of the way through your survey is gone. So flow is really important. And again, right, like, I will re-emphasize this, not because it's part of this, but I just want to re-emphasize it because I think it's important. If you say your survey is going to take 15 minutes, if it takes 17 minutes, you need to rethink. Maybe not 17, but if it takes 25, we got problems. And I will retroactively fail you if you ever send me a survey and I'm like, oh yeah, Reg was in my class. He's doing research now for his PhD, and he just sent me this survey, and it's like, it'll take you 15 minutes. It takes me 25. I will go back and I will fail you in this class. I don't know how. I'm sure there's a way to retroactively fail a student for failing to learn. No, I'm kidding. But definitely don't do that, right? So, these time limits should be pretty hard and fast. You don't want to waste people's time. Okay. I'm just checking. No questions. Huzzah. Okay. Did I skip a slide? No, okay. Really, the gray background really makes me think of like... Thanks, Reg. The Reg types in the YouTube chat, I will make sure to make it 3 hours and then say it'll take 10 minutes. That's perfect. Because at that point you'll be doing your PhD, and I will find a way to retroactively fail it for you for this class, and then they'll take away your bachelor's degree, which will, then cause you to lose your master's degree and your PhD. So we'll be fine. You'll be. I'll take everything away from you for this one small sin. This is a recurring nightmare of mine, that I failed a math class in undergrad, but I got my degree anyway, and that as a result, all my degrees are nullified. So it's a very, very strange dream. Okay, I've talked to you already about this, so we can probably go through it relatively quickly. Wow, that took 43 minutes. Anyway, there's lots of things. I love survey design, as you can tell. So, I probably shouldn't tap like that. It probably sounds terrible in the recording. Right. I talked about this already in terms of things like using existing questions. And here again, I want to emphasize that this is not cheating, right? So, it's not cheating. And I know that, we want to always teach you how to do everything for yourself in undergrad. We want to make sure that you know how to write a survey question. And by and large, I think that's true. We definitely want to make sure that you're able to do some of these things on your own, because there won't always be, an existing question set to use. So you do want to be able to write your own questions. However, there are definitely going to be social phenomena where the idea of writing your own question is going to be kind of nonsense, right? Like, the idea that that's what you should do is going to lead you down a really, really difficult path, right? Because maybe you're not an expert in a particular topic. So it's okay to go and look up what other people have done. And there are a ton of tools out there, right? There's a million tools out there all over the place for analyzing all sorts of aspects, right? And this is one of those hard ones, right? Like, I've had people, as part of their project, they want to, talk about neurodivergence. So they want to, basically ask people about their status, right? So, like, are they, ASD? But then you get into questions of like, okay, well, what if they're self-diagnosed? How are you gonna get that? Like, or, ADHD, depression, anxiety. These are all things that we have sort of, I think, relatively objective measures for. But if you just ask people something to the effect of, have you ever been diagnosed with depression and anxiety? You might get a certain percentage of people that are like, well, I'm self-diagnosed. I've diagnosed myself with ADHD. And this, I will say, is, to me, slightly maddening for lots of reasons. But it does, you can get sort of false results. So in cases like this, right, you can use existing question sets or subsets of them. Like, sometimes, I don't know, say with like, my favorite, the UCLA Loneliness Index, right? Our UCLA Loneliness Index, which I'll show you some on the next slide. You maybe don't have to use them all, right? You can kind of pick and choose from the scale. I wouldn't say you want to adjust it too much, because that in itself can end up being a little bit problematic. But you can use subsets of questionnaires, right, to try and figure out things. And as I've said, there are, I touched my screen. There are a million of these scales. There are scales for just about anything you can imagine. Depression, anxiety, loneliness, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, all these things, right? Which you could then score people for, or all sorts of stuff. And a lot of these scales are really fast. That's the other thing, like, you can do them really, really fast. Okay.
So what's the motivation here? Well, essentially, you know this tool works, right? At least in an academic study or setting, especially if it's been used multiple times, or it's a really well-established tool, right? Some of these tools have been around for years or even decades, right? And so you can say, well, this is at least, when I'm doing my research application and I'm doing my operationalization, I can make the case that this scale's been around forever and it's really well recognized and everybody knows it, right? And so, it's a good tool. And right there, the legitimacy of your kind of proposal looks better because you know the literature, you know the tools, and you're using a tool that I'm counting on my fingers. I don't know why. You understand the tools and you've done the work into thinking about, what would be the best way of getting at these concepts. And again, when you're talking operationalization, it ends up being super easy because you're like, I will administer the 20 question, it might be 10, but whatever, question UCLA loneliness index to measure loneliness. And that is your operationalization, right? How do you operationalize loneliness? I will administer the 20 question UCLA loneliness index. Responses will be scored out of, I don't know, whatever it is, 50. I can't remember. But whatever the scale is, right? And I'll tell you, the scale comes with the measurement tool. So, and this, again, you can see the questions that I've got here, and these are just examples for depression, right? Little interest in doing things, or pleasure in doing things, not at all, several days. Have you felt like this is basically the question. More than half the days or nearly every day, right? Feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, again. And you can see that every time they answer in a particular way, so it's like, okay, here, so now we're at 2, and then here, so now we're at 5, and, several days. Well, now we're at 6. 6 out of 9 here. And then, there's more questions on the scale. I just took a screenshot of these. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. But to give you kind of final score, and you would say, oh, okay, well, now I know. Now I can rate this person based on that score, right? So that, let's say that this is your, subject 1. The first person to do your thing. Okay, so now they've scored a 6 out of 9, which I'm going to say is mildly depressed, right? So now that you've got a descriptor for that case, and then you can aggregate all your cases based on the score. So I think pretty straightforward. I hope. Okay, so I'm sorry, these are really small. I don't know if I can zoom in on these. I can't. But you see, so using so this is this is UCLA's loneliness index, right? And these are your 4 responses, right? So you can see immediately, right, how quick and efficient it will be to answer these, right? So I don't know how many questions are here. I could count them, but I won't. Someone could do this really, really quickly, and you could get a really strong sense of where they're at, right? So how often do you say you're in tune with the people around you? Okay, sometimes. How often do you feel you lack companionship? Rarely. I have 3 kids. I never lack companionship. How often do you feel there is no one you can turn to? Sometimes, right? I'm not actually doing this. How often do you feel lonely? Never. I have 3 children. You never get time to feel lonely. How often do you feel part of a group of friends? Sometimes. How often do you feel you have a lot in common with the people around you? Never. I'm an academic. No one likes me. Anyway, so you see how quickly you could do, something like this. And right, so, never, your sometimes is a 3. Rarely is a 2. Sometimes is a 3. Never is a 0, or a 1, sorry. Never is a 1. Sometimes is a 3, and never is a 1. So right here you've got, 5, 8, 9, 12, 13, right? So let's say that's 13 out of whatever, right? And then you can classify this as like lonely or not lonely, right? And you can do this for each case. So for every single person that you administer this tool to, sorry, I said a thought, a very distressing thought, but I'm good. I thought I missed a meeting, but my meeting is tomorrow. Because we're talking about this scale. So we want to use it. Anyway, that's not important. But you know, every single person that takes your survey, you would automatically give them a score, right? And then let's say you're doing U of A students, you could say like, oh, 42% of U of A students reported, feeling lonely, which we score as like between, 20 and 25 or whatever, right? So, really well, so this is the scale, and you can see kind of what it looks like. And you can see like these questions are not super complex. The scale is very simple. The way you answer it is very simple. So these are really elegant tools, and they work really, really well. Why? Well, because they've been tested, right? And so people have found their correspondence. Okay, I'll shut up about them. I've talked enough about existing scales. Okay, I know you've probably tuned out. I've seen our viewership numbers decreasing over time. Well, I never know how accurate the YouTube viewing numbers really are. Okay, so we've got a few minutes left here. How far shall we go? Hang on a sec. Let's see how much we have left on this particular topic. We got a fair bit. Okay, so we'll keep going. We'll see how we do. Okay, so I've been talking a lot, through this whole section about surveys. I use this term very broadly, right? The textbook and kind of the official literature uses this a little bit differently. So, they're going to split it between what we call a structured interview, where there's a person, someone like you, who's with another person, or on the phone, and basically talking through a survey, right? So what you're doing is going through kind of fixed responses with maybe some open questions where people can talk, but you're following that script, and you don't get to deviate from it. You just get to follow the script, right? There's no improv. There's no follow-ups. You just ask the questions. Follow-ups, no. Banned, right? Not happening. Okay. So, what was I saying? That's what's referred to here as a structured interview. It's a kind of a survey, right? It's just one that's being done by a person, right? Either in person or by phones. By the way, the little rectangles in their hands are phones. I'm sure you figured that out while I was drawing it. A questionnaire, right, again, is a survey. But it's a survey without an interviewer. So we don't have an interviewer here. That's all. We do not have an interviewer. So yeah, questionnaires are structured interviews without an interviewer. So what this usually looks like today, right? I gotta get my pen back. It used to be mail, right? People used to mail out surveys all the time. Right, so you would stick it in an envelope, you would write the person's name on it, put a stamp on, send it in the mail, and some percentage of people would complete it, and some percentage of people wouldn't, right? And it's kind of like throwing things out, and you do it by postal code, and you randomly select addresses within that postal code to send it. We'll talk about probability sampling coming up here. Okay, increasingly now, right, most of them are done online. Now, online has its own kind of unique and particular problems. What I would say is most of what I would consider online sampling is what I call quota sampling. We'll talk about it when we talk about probability sampling. You're not actually doing random sampling, you're doing semi-random sampling based on, a list of people that you have available to you because they signed up for your platform. Because sending random emails to random email addresses is not a method that could ever possibly work. I think, like, again, I don't like these guys. I think their methodology is kind of trash. But ECOS will do this, right? Where basically, they will send out text messages to random phone numbers, and then just kind of hope that people answer. I think Tell City Hall is another one. Tell City Hall will do this. They send stuff to me all the time. It's really annoying. And sometimes I do them, sometimes I don't. I don't really, but this is, sorry. I'm rambling because I just want to poop on ECOS for all sorts of reasons. I really don't like their methodologies. But yeah, increasingly, it's hard to get really probability sampling online. Online has all sorts of structural issues that make probability sampling really, really difficult. So what we've really ended up with, I think, is much more what we'll call quota sampling. But we'll get to that later on. Which then you're like, why did you bring it up if you're not going to explain it? Well, I will eventually. Just always like to give you a preview of what's happening next. Okay, so questionnaires obviously get rid of any kind of interviewer bias, right? Or interviewer effect. Because there's no interviewer. So interviewer effects, so even things like social desirability bias are reduced in online and mail surveys because there's no other person. Now, that said, the interviewer can't explain the questions because there is no interviewer, right? So when we talk about something like online or mail surveys, people are reading the answers themselves. They have to be very clear and easy to follow, right? And think of this, right? Like, look at these questions. They're super easy to interpret and answer. Why? Because they have to be, right? It has to be really simple for a person to understand. Okay. I love my Dilbert comics. Put into the bottom here. They always make me laugh. Okay. All right. So, compared to interviews, right? Structured interviews especially, questionnaires or surveys online or mail surveys. And honestly, I don't think you'll ever see a mail survey at this point. That's a thing of the deep, distant past. Even the census, right? The Canadian census they send you a mailer which takes you to an online site, right? To StatsCan. So you don't tend to get a lot of open questions because closed questions are easier to answer. And I think I've told you, right? Like when I run into especially if I'm doing it on my phone, and device here matters. If I'm doing it on my laptop, it's a different story. But when you get something like a questionnaire that, say, has a lot of boxes, if I'm doing it, on my phone, it's a Pixel, I'll immediately kind of check out. It's too much work to type. Typos happen too much. They're screwy. I don't like doing it on my phone. And so I will immediately sort of, exit the survey. Oops, I touched the wrong side of my page. I meant to exit out. So you don't get a lot of open questions. They're harder to answer, and you're going to have a greater failure rate where people just aren't going to do them. Or, you get the other thing, which I've also done, because I'm a bad person, and I don't help my fellow researchers. And it's like, right, and I'm like, no, 3 words, then done, right? Which gives you absolutely no value as a researcher. Okay. Simple designs, so respondents can complete all the sections without difficulty. And here, online, right, is super helpful because the software will just take you through. That's taking you through. I don't know why it looks like that. It'll just take you through the survey without you having to really do anything. Whereas, when it was paper, it was like, okay, if you answered yes to question 1, go to question 5. Or if you answered no to question 5, go to section B, right? Some of these could be really irritating to do. So, online makes this all easier because it's like you answer yes and it takes you to question 5. You answer no and it automatically takes you to section B as long as you've done the logic correctly. Okay. And yeah, they typically when we talk about questionnaires, they do have to be relatively short, right? because if they get too long, people get discouraged or just mad, right? I just love this. The results of our customer satisfaction survey are in. 83% spat at their telephone until they died of dehydration. We're calling that group the lucky ones. Anyway. So, okay. Advantages of questionnaires over structured interviews. Now, obviously they each have their place, right? In something like the University of Alberta Prison Project, there's no way that you could ever do questionnaires, right? Just these written things. You'd never get the you'd never get the response rate you want. That said, questionnaires are considerably cheaper, quicker, and more convenient to administer. And we're talking here like, okay, let's say I wanted to get a representative sample in Edmonton, right? So 1,500 people. And let's say we're doing it with Abacus. Right, so we want to do 1,500 Edmontonians, or Albertans, or whatever. We want to do this with Abacus data. It's not cheap. But you're talking probably about $15,000. Because I did my math education in French, so I always put the dollar sign at the end. So 15,000, right? Which is, not cheap. Not cheap at all. But it's doable. Let's say you wanted to do, and I can tell you because I've been in charge of the budget on the UAPP, right? So, the University of Alberta Prison Project, I would say the budget is a lot closer to like 170,000 to have these done in person. Why? Because each time one of our researchers sits down with somebody, right, and that's an hour, right? 1 hour, let's say generously, I don't know what we pay them to be honest, at $24 an hour. And probably the people on the project would be like, yeah, I wish I got $24 an hour. No worries. Now, you're going to do 1,500 interviews at $24 an hour, plus whatever you have to pay, people, plus all the failed ones, all the calls, all the time they had to spend recruiting people, right? All of that stuff, is going to cost you a lot more, right? And orders of magnitude more. So, it's a lot of money, right? Easily double or triple or 10 times as much to do like an in-person phone survey. And phone surveys are ridiculously expensive now. And they're not they're not that effective. Okay, I'll tell you this, because I did this a few years ago, right back in beginning of 2020. How long did it take me to get my results, my 1,500? It took me 3 days. I just sent it out to Abacus. They sent it out on their platforms. And within 3 days, they're like, hey, we got your results. Here they are. So now you have a treasure trove of data in almost no time, which is, phenomenal. This, 1,500 phone or in-person interviews is going to take you months. At the very least, it's going to take you weeks. The faster you want it to go, the more it costs, because that means more people on the phones trying to get you respondents, right? So the cheapness, right? One of the reasons that everybody's gone to these online platforms, and if you're doing survey data, the reason you want to go to these online platforms as well is quite simply because of how inexpensive they are in comparison. Okay? And quick, right? So quick. No interviewer effect, right? No, you don't have to train anybody, right? There's no training. That's another thing that costs. Who is texting me now? Rogers Bank would like to offer me a MasterCard. Aren't we all thrilled? I'm expecting, I think Trudeau was meeting with Donald Trump an hour ago or 2 hours ago, and I'm like, my friend has been texting me the results. And I'm super curious whether we got reprieve. So, so no interviewer effect, no training people, right? Again, training and costs, all this jazz, right? It's all fun stuff. Social desirability bias seems to be reduced, right? Because you're clicking boxes or buttons on a form online. And yeah, respondents are more likely to give genuine responses to sensitive questions, although I will say not always. Even as, say, platforms or research firms like Pew, right? And Pew's a great American research firm. I know them mostly for their religion stuff, but they do a lot of other things. They transitioned to online a few years ago, and they're still measuring, say, weekly service attendance in the US at about 25%. 25% of people attend weekly or more. Other methodologies have said the number is probably closer to 5. So that's quite interesting. Again, I don't know if that's... I don't actually buy this 5% number. This was done with a really weird methodology where they basically bought, your anonymized phone data, so the GPS tracking on your phone, and they were like, "What happens on Sunday mornings? Do we have 25% of people heading off to church?" And they're like, "No, we only have..." That's a church, by the way. No, we only have about 5%, right? Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But not always, right? And I do believe that this number, represents social desirability bias anyway. So, just because it's online doesn't mean you don't have any social desirability bias. Okay, just checking the time here. Oh, exclusive with Rogers. And get another credit card, just what I needed. Okay. Disadvantages of questionnaires over structured interviews. And these are pretty easy, right? You can't explain there's no one there to explain the question. More risk of missing data because of lack of probing or supervision. They need to be short, right? Again, 15 to 25 minutes at the outside, or people are going to get really frustrated, bored, and quit. Difficult to ask open questions, right? People don't want to write a lot. You can't track. This is true of like mail surveys. Online, you can just kind of force people to answer them in order. So that's less true today. Yeah, not appropriate for certain respondents, right? Certainly, vulnerable populations are not going to do well. I've had lots of people in the past, suggest they wanted to work with unhoused people and do like surveys, and like questionnaires are just not going to work for unhoused people. They just don't. They don't have the devices to complete them on, any of that stuff. So, all good. Okay. Yeah, web surveys, these are nice, like I've been talking about. Almost, I would say probably 90% of our surveys now, or better, are all being done on the web. More and more through people's phones. You can make them look really nice, right, which is great. You control the flow and all this stuff. The other nice thing, there's no manual entry of anything. Everything gets downloaded automatically into your database, so the data's really quick to work with. Okay, sorry. I think this was an example of online design software for surveys. Sorry, I'm double checking again where I'm at here. Where am I at? Maybe it's a good moment to kind of pause, and we will finish up, we'll finish up survey design on Wednesday, kind of go from there. More expensive. Yeah, I think let's do that. We got a couple more, but I'm feeling peaked, at 71 minutes, so maybe it's a good place to stop for the day. We'll kind of let it go from there, and we'll pick this up on Wednesday. We'll finish up survey methods, and we'll start on probability sampling, which should leave us in a good spot, I think, to complete everything, by Monday of next week. And then we can kind of have the Wednesday prior to reading week as a drop-in session for extra help on major lab or whatever you want, or you can just skip the class. All up to you. And we'll kind of, I think we go from there, and I think we'll be in good shape. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to exit. Should I keep my doodles? No, I'll discard. And we will, yeah, I'll make myself big. And yeah, we'll kind of leave it there, and we'll see you all on Wednesday. We'll do it in person on Wednesday. It's not supposed to be nearly as cold, plus I need to be on campus anyway. But today I felt like I had a little bit of leeway, so it seemed like it would make sense to just do it online. And yeah, thanks for not minding, or if you did mind, happy to take your complaints. But we'll see you on on Wednesday.